The auctioneer's gavel struck wood with the finality of a gravestone marker, but Clara Whitman didn't flinch. She stood on that makeshift platform behind Murphy's mercantile, her chin raised despite the jeers cutting through the desert air like thrown knives. Her wedding dress, yellowed with age and tight across her frame, had been her mother's, and now it served as her funeral shroud in front of half the town of Broken Creek. "What's the bid for this fine specimen?" Murphy's voice dripped with mock ceremony. "Strong back, good for cookin' and cleanin'. Just needs a man brave enough to handle the extra portions." Laughter rippled through the crowd of sun-weathered faces. Clara's hands trembled, but she kept them clasped in front of her, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. This wasn't how mail-order brides were supposed to work. The arrangement had crumbled when her intended took one look at her, stepping off the stagecoach, and disappeared into the saloon, leaving her stranded with nothing but a trunk of belongings and a town full of strangers who saw her as entertainment. $5, someone shouted from the back, followed by drunken cackles. $5 for a wife. Hell, I'd pay more for a decent horse. The bidding became a cruel game. Men called out prices like they were haggling over livestock, each number punctuated with crude jokes about her size, her prospects, her worth as a woman. Clara felt each word like a physical blow, but she'd survived worse. The workhouse back in Philadelphia had taught her that dignity was something you carried inside, not something others could take away. Heat shimmered off the dusty street, and sweat beaded on her forehead beneath the oppressive sun. She focused on a point beyond the crowd, the mountains rising purple against the horizon, promising escape to somewhere, anywhere but here. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Sometimes the Lord tests us in ways that don't make sense, Clara girl, but he's always watching." Going once for $15 to Jake Morrison, Murphy's voice cut through her thoughts. Jake Morrison stepped forward, his gap-toothed grin making her stomach turn. She'd seen him in the saloon, heard the stories about his first wife who'd died under mysterious circumstances. The way he looked at her now made her skin crawl. Going twice, the crowd fell silent, sensing the cruel conclusion to their afternoon's entertainment. Clara closed her eyes and whispered a prayer to a god who seemed to have forgotten her somewhere between Pennsylvania and this god-forsaken desert town. Then a voice cut through the silence like thunder rolling across empty plains. $100. Every head turned toward the voice. Through the shifting crowd emerged a man Clara had noticed at the edge of the gathering, but assumed was just another spectator come to watch her humiliation. He was tall, lean as a fence post, with dark hair that curled at his collar, and eyes the color of winter storms. His clothes were simple but clean, worn denim, a blue cotton shirt, boots that had seen honest work but weren't falling apart. The crowd's laughter died like a campfire doused with water. "Did you say $100, Mr. Cain?" Murphy's voice cracked slightly. It was more money than most men in Broken Creek saw in 6 months. "I did." Thomas Cain's voice carried quiet authority as he stepped closer to the platform. "Cash money." Jake Morrison's face twisted into something ugly. "Now hold on there, Cain. I was the high bidder fair and square. You can't just auction's not over till Murphy says it is." Cain's hand rested casually near the Colt at his hip, a gesture so subtle most folks might have missed it. But Jake Morrison wasn't most folks, and he stepped back with a curse. Clara studied this stranger who'd just bought her like a prize heifer. She'd heard whispers about Thomas Cain since arriving in town, a former Army scout who'd settled on a small ranch outside town, kept to himself, paid his debts, and didn't cause trouble. But $100, that was a fortune. What kind of man paid that much for a woman he'd never spoken to? Going once, twice sold to Thomas Cain. Murphy's gavel fell with finality. The crowd began to disperse, their entertainment concluded but their whispers just beginning. Clara watched Cain approach the platform, his expression unreadable. When he reached up to help her down, his hands were gentle but impersonal, like he was handling something fragile that didn't quite belong to him. "Ma'am," he said quietly, his voice meant only for her, "I know this isn't what you expected, but I give you my word, you'll be treated with respect." She searched his face for deception, for the cruel gleam she'd seen in Jake Morrison's eyes, for any sign of what he truly wanted from this transaction. Instead, she found something that surprised her: uncertainty. This man who'd just spent a fortune wasn't entirely sure why he'd done it. Why? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Cain glanced around at the dispersing crowd, then back at her. "Because everybody deserves better than being auctioned off like cattle," he paused, then added more quietly, "and because I know what it's like to be unwanted." Before she could respond, a commotion erupted from the direction of the saloon. Riders were approaching fast, and the dust they kicked up carried the kind of urgency that meant trouble was coming to Broken Creek. The thunder of hoofbeats grew louder as 4 riders materialized through the heat shimmer, their horses lathered with sweat and foam. The lead rider bore a silver star on his vest that caught the sunlight like a warning. Sheriff Hawkins from the county seat, his face grim beneath his weathered hat. The men behind him wore the hard look of a posse that had been riding for days. Cain's hand instinctively moved toward his gun, then stopped. Clara noticed the tension that suddenly coiled through his shoulders like a spring wound too tight. "Thomas Cain," Sheriff Hawkins' voice carried across the now silent street. The few townspeople who hadn't already scattered after the auction froze in place, sensing the electricity in the air that preceded lightning strikes and gunfights. Cain stepped protectively in front of Clara, though whether he was shielding her from the lawmen or hiding from them, she couldn't tell. "Sheriff," he said evenly, "didn't expect to see you in Broken Creek." "Bet you didn't." Hawkins dismounted with the stiffness of a man who'd been too long in the saddle. "Got a wire yesterday about some missing Army payroll. Funny thing, trail leads right back to a certain former scout who disappeared around the same time as $10,000 in gold eagles." The accusation hit the gathered crowd like a physical blow. Murmurs rippled through the onlookers who'd remained to gawk. Clara felt the ground shift beneath her feet, not literally, but in every way that mattered. She'd just been purchased by a man who might be a thief, or worse. "That's a serious accusation, Sheriff," Cain said, his voice steady as granite. "You got proof to go with it?" "Working on it." Hawkins' eyes never left Cain's face. "But funny thing about guilty men, they tend to do foolish things with their stolen money, like throwing around $100 bills at bride auctions." The crowd's attention swiveled between Cain and Clara like spectators at a tennis match. She could feel their stares, could practically hear their thoughts. "Poor girl bought by an outlaw. What'll happen to her now?" Murphy stepped forward, wringing his hands. "Now, Sheriff, Mr. Cain's money was good. I saw it myself. I'm sure it was good, Murphy. Question is where he got it." Hawkins approached Cain with the careful steps of a man who knew exactly how dangerous his quarry could be. "I'm gonna have to ask you to come with us, Cain. Just for questioning, you understand." Cain's jaw tightened. Clara could see the calculations running behind his storm gray eyes, the distance to his horse, the number of armed men facing him, the innocent bystanders who might get hurt if this turned ugly. His hand moved away from his gun in a gesture of surrender that somehow looked more dangerous than if he'd drawn it. "And what about her?" Cain nodded toward Clara without taking his eyes off the sheriff. Hawkins glanced at Clara as if just remembering she existed. "Reckon that auction's null and void if you can't pay with honest money. She'll have to find her own way." The words hit Clara like a slap. After everything, the humiliation, the cruel laughter, the brief moment of hope when Cain had stepped forward, she was right back where she'd started. Worse, actually, because now the whole town knew exactly what she was worth to them: nothing. But as Sheriff Hawkins moved to take Cain's arm, something unexpected happened. Clara stepped forward, placing herself between the lawman and the man who'd just bought her freedom, however briefly.
"Oh, wait,"
she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I want to know something first." Hawkins frowned. "Ma'am, this doesn't concern. It concerns me plenty." Clara's chin lifted with the same defiance she'd shown on the auction platform. She looked directly at Cain, searching his face. "Did you steal that money?" The question hung in the desert air like smoke. Cain could have lied, probably should have lied, given the circumstances. Instead, he met her gaze with unflinching honesty. "No, ma'am, I didn't." Something in his voice, in the way he said it without explanation or justification, made Clara believe him. She'd learned to read people in the workhouse, to distinguish between the men who meant her harm and the few who didn't. Thomas Cain, whatever his flaws, wasn't a liar. "Then I'm going with you," she said firmly. Clara. Cain started, but she cut him off. "It's Mrs. Cain now, legally speaking, till this gets sorted out anyway." She turned to Sheriff Hawkins. "You can't stop a wife from accompanying her husband, can you, Sheriff?" Hawkins looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Ma'am, where we're going isn't suitable for a lady. There might be trouble." "Sheriff," Clara said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "I've been in trouble since the day I was born. A little more won't kill me." Cain stared at her with something approaching wonder. Here was a woman he barely knew, defending him in front of armed lawmen when she had every reason to run in the opposite direction. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "Maybe not, but you stood up for me when nobody else would." Clara reached into her small reticule and pulled out something that made Cain's breath catch, a tarnished silver locket that had belonged to her mother. "My daddy always said you can judge a man's character by how he treats people who can't do anything for him."
"Oh, wait.
"You didn't buy me because you wanted something. You did it because it was right." She pressed the locket into his hand, her fingers brushing his for just a moment. "That's been in my family for 3 generations. It's all I have left of home, but I want you to keep it, so you'll know that someone believes you're innocent." Cain closed his fingers around the small piece of jewelry, feeling its weight, not just the silver but the trust it represented. In his entire adult life, no one had ever given him something precious simply because they believed in him. Sheriff Hawkins cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Touching as this is, we need to get moving. Sun's getting low and I want to make camp before dark." But something had shifted in the air, some indefinable change in the dynamics of the situation.
Oh.
Clara's public declaration of faith in Cain's innocence had planted seeds of doubt in the minds of the watching townspeople. Maybe they'd been too quick to judge. Maybe there was more to this story than met the eye.
Ugh.
The ride to the county seat took 2 days, and by the time they arrived, Sheriff Hawkins had heard enough of Cain's story to start questioning his own assumptions. The missing payroll, Cain explained, had been stolen by his former commanding officer, Captain Bradley, who'd been selling information to hostile tribes and needed a scapegoat when the army started investigating.
Oh.
Cain had discovered the theft and confronted Bradley, who'd framed him and disappeared with the gold. "Convenient story," Hawkins had said, but his tone lacked conviction. "Check the army records," Cain replied. "Ask around Fort Collins about Captain Bradley's gambling debts and his sudden resignation. Ask why he left town the same day the payroll went missing, 2 hours before I did." The investigation took a week. Clara waited in the small boarding house sewing to pay for her room and board while Cain sat in the county jail. She visited him every day, bringing him meals and news from the outside world. Gradually, Hawkins' inquiries began to paint a different picture, one that implicated Captain Bradley and cleared Cain's name.
Ugh.
When the wire arrived from Fort Collins confirming Cain's story and reporting Bradley's arrest in Mexico with most of the stolen gold, Hawkins unlocked the cell with obvious embarrassment. "Seems I owe you an apology, Cain," he said gruffly, "and probably compensation for the trouble."
Oh.
Cain emerged into the sunlight a free man, but it was Clara's smile that truly liberated him. She was waiting on the courthouse steps, her face bright with vindication and something deeper, something that had grown during those long days of believing in him when no one else would. "So," she said as they walked toward the livery stable to collect his horse, "what happens now?" "Our arrangement was somewhat unconventional." Cain stopped walking and turned to face her. The $100 had been his entire savings, money earned from honest work on his small ranch, not stolen army gold. He'd spent it all on a woman he didn't know,
for reasons he couldn't fully explain even to himself. "I reckon that depends," he said carefully, "on whether you'd consider staying married to a poor rancher who just spent his last dollar on principle." Clara studied his face, really looked at him for the first time since that day in Broken Creek. She saw strength there and kindness, and the kind of loneliness that matched her own. "Oh," she said thoughtfully, "I've been poor before, and I've been alone before, but I've never been married to a good man before." Cain's smile transformed his entire face. "Then I guess we'll figure it out as we go." Oh. They were married again 6 months later, this time by choice rather than auction, in the small church Cain had helped build on his property. Oh. By then Clara had proven herself invaluable not just as a wife but as a partner, her quick mind and fierce determination helping to turn their struggling ranch into something approaching prosperity. Years later, when neighbors asked how they'd known it would work out, Cain would always say the same thing: "Sometimes the best things in life come from doing what's right, even when it doesn't make sense at the time." And Clara, now grown comfortable in her own skin and secure in love that had nothing to do with her size or society's expectations, would add with a smile, "Sometimes what looks like an ending is really just the beginning wearing a disguise." Oh. The silver locket still hung around Cain's neck, a reminder of the day a stranger chose to believe in him when belief was all she had to give.